The police will be back in the spotlight tomorrow. They're releasing their quarterly crime stats at 12 noon. Of course, these announcements are always really difficult. We reflect, of course, on the bloodshed in South Africa. But there's another cost to our crime crisis, and it seems it's hitting our pockets directly. Let's get those details. Reporter Michael Marillier tracking this one for us. Hello, Michael. So you've been looking at the financial cost, and I suppose this is so relevant, bearing in mind the impact of the unrest in July. But it must be quite difficult to put a number on it in some cases.
Yeah, that's right, Sally. So a group known as the Institute for Economics and Peace has actually calculated the economic cost of both homicides specifically and of violence in general. And what they do is they look at the direct costs, so the costs of policing, the cost of healthcare that's associated with violent attacks. They also look at the indirect costs, so that's a loss of productivity, for instance, when you have violence in a country. Obviously, if you're assaulted, you can't go to work for a few days, perhaps. So those sorts of costs all add up and have an impact on the economy. Let's focus, first of all, on homicides, Sally, and we'll get some clarity in terms of what that actually costs South Africa. Believe it or not, 6% of South Africa's GDP in 2019. That translated, Sally, to a cost of 315 billion rand. You mentioned the unrest in July and the looting. The president put a figure on that of roughly 50 billion rand. Some estimates suggesting it could be a little bit lower. But that just puts it in perspective, Sally. The cost of everyday violence around about 6 times higher than the chaos that we actually saw during the looting and those riots in July this year. But let's take a look at some other countries just to put it in perspective, Sally. A lot of these countries we tend to think of as crime capitals. It turns out South Africa's cost of crime is higher than theirs. Brazil, for instance, 5.2% of their GDP. Guatemala, 4.4%, and Colombia, 4.2%. A lot of people will think of Colombia as a place where criminal gangs are active, a place which is filled with the drug trade. Turns out South Africa's cost of crime much higher than Colombia's. Something to bear in mind, Sally, as those police stats come out tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, it certainly will be, and that's at 12 noon tomorrow. There are lots of different kinds of violence, of course. So when you look at the big picture, what do you get?
So this, of course, incorporates homicides as well as assaults, sexual assaults, effectively the whole bundle of crime categories. Let's take a quick look at that, Sally. And again, we're going to take a look at a global perspective. This is a heat map showing the cost of GDP around the world. And wherever you see yellow or orange, Sally, that's a country which is in trouble. I also wanted to take a look at some of the African countries that tend to generate a lot of investment from the likes of the United States and Europe. So, for example, Angola, DRC, Nigeria. All of them, Sally, have an economic cost of crime much lower than South Africa. 5% for Angola, 7% for the DRC, and Nigeria just 8%. Compare that to South Africa, 12% of GDP in 2019. That's important because we're competing with these countries when it comes to getting foreign direct investment. So what is the price when you look at the big picture, Sally? Let's take a quick look at that. The estimates from the experts put it, Sally, at around about 630 billion rand in 2019. So that is the price in terms of direct and indirect costs of violence in South Africa. The IEP, Sally, this institute, also saying that there's a multiplier effect. So in other words, if the money wasn't spent on policing and healthcare, it could be put to more productive use, which could be even better for our economy. So that multiplier effect is there as well.
I mean, it's astonishing if you break it down in those terms. I will look at the crime stats released tomorrow at 12 in quite a different way, with perhaps even more concern than I would normally. Thank you very much, Michael Marillier.